People love to say that Smile is unoriginal because it has the same basic concept as It Follows. But the thing is, It Follows is not an entirely original concept either. I mean, honestly, nothing in horror is. And it would be silly to complain about a movie like X being too similar to like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the thing is, It Follows took great inspiration from like The Ring, and The Ring followed in the footsteps of like Friday the 13th. I think that it's time that we accept that there are well-established horror tropes that movies can consciously utilize. The idea of an inescapable supernatural entity that is following you and you cannot get away from, specifically one that's been passed to you, is a well-established horror trope by this point. Also, hi, call me Chris. That's so weird. You're like one of the OG TikTokers. I feel like I'm talking to the queen or something. But the thing is, like, while this movie does follow a formula, a trope, I would posit, it is very structurally and thematically different from both It Follows and the films that inspired that film. The thing about the horror genre specifically is that if it were just about finding entirely original and creative ways to kill characters on screen, it would get boring so fast. That's one of the reasons why I don't really like the Terrifier series. Horror, even the earliest iterations of it, like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, was like a biting social commentary, a huge and very poignant critique on consumerism, with themes of like racism and hyper-individuality actually being a bad thing. Horror has always been a densely thematic genre that is just chock full of razor-sharp social commentary, and that's why you can have 8 million different slashers, but each one can have something different to say. That's why you can have stories that have similar formulas and building blocks, but are structurally and thematically entirely different. It Follows is a classic teen horror story, and it very intentionally addresses issues that very specifically apply to mostly and exclusively teens, like the emphasis on purity culture and the shame that comes with any kind of sexuality. I would argue that It Follows is thematically much closer to like Halloween or Friday the 13th than even The Ring, and of course Smile, because the first Smile addressed a lot of thematic issues around depression, isolation, and grief. Whereas The Ring is about a single mother and breaking cycles of abuse, even though they all like have a similar structure. You see what I mean? And even Smile 1 and Smile 2 are vastly different from each other in the themes that they address and the structure that they utilize to tell the story. That's what's so interesting about horror and why I think Smile is, yes, an original franchise, because even within a franchise, it's hard to break the mold of your second film or third film or all of the films in your franchise being too similar to each other, being just basically a copy-paste version of the first one, again, trying to capitalize off of that money. But Smile took a story that was about a psychiatrist and intense isolation, and instead put it on a pop star who's beloved by the entire world. So the story is structurally entirely different. That's what's so cool about this series to me so far. And frankly, with the way Smile 2 ends, I'm sure the inevitable Smile 3 will have a radically different like narrative structure, because how could it not? So in conclusion, even though I get what you're saying, and a lot of people have said it, you're definitely not alone in having this sentiment. But I think that this is a criticism that is hurled at horror films specifically because the genre of horror is so vastly underestimated in its ability to do anything other than just scare you. I feel like people completely underestimate like the horror genre's ability to create films that, first of all, stand the test of time, are unique and interesting in their own right. It's just completely separate from the fact that they're fucking terrifying. And I think that even though a horror film has a similar structure, it can still be like wildly beautiful. Like no one would ever say, oh, When Harry Met Sally is the only rom-com that we ever need because it's the best one. Each one is different. Each one is cool. They follow a similar structure always, but those are just tropes. Those are just tropes that we utilize to tell an interesting and relatable story. And I feel like Smile has done that twice now. So